I trusted him with my career, and he used my own words to try to take it from me. For 3 years, Olivia Bennett believed that Ryan Mitchell was the safest person in the entire 12-story glass building in downtown Chicago, the one coworker who felt less like competition and more like family, the kind of work best friend who knew how she took her coffee, remembered her mom's surgery date, and stayed late on Thursdays just to help her polish slides for executive meetings that most people avoided like traffic on the Kennedy Expressway at 5 p.m. When Olivia first joined Stratodine Solutions at 26, fresh out of a mid-sized consulting firm and still adjusting to the speed of a corporate environment where decisions worth millions of dollars were made in conference rooms with recycled air and lukewarm bottled water, Ryan had been the first senior manager to treat her like she belonged. He had pulled up a chair beside her during her first big strategy review, whispered quick guidance about which VP tended to interrupt and which one needed bullet points instead of long explanations, and afterward told her, with a grin that seemed sincere, that she was the future of this company. Over time, their lunches became routine, usually at a sandwich spot half a mile from the office where they would split fries and talk about everything from quarterly projections to weekend hiking plans in Wisconsin, and colleagues started referring to them as a package deal, the kind of duo that finished each other's sentences during brainstorming sessions and defended each other when ideas were challenged. Olivia admired Ryan's decade of experience, the way he could command a room without raising his voice, and she felt proud when he introduced her to directors as his right hand, never imagining that admiration and trust could quietly turn into leverage. When rumors began circulating about an upcoming director of strategy position opening before the end of the fiscal year, it felt like the natural next step for someone like Ryan, and Olivia genuinely believed she would be cheering him on from the sidelines, maybe even stepping into more responsibility under his leadership. What she didn't realize was that ambition has a way of reshaping relationships, especially when titles, six-figure salaries, and corner offices with skyline views are suddenly within reach. The day the promotion was officially announced in an all-hands meeting, complete with a slide deck outlining expanded authority and a compensation package that included performance bonuses tied to annual growth percentages, something subtle shifted in the air between them, though Olivia couldn't quite name it. She only knew that Ryan's usual easy confidence sharpened into focus, his questions during meetings became more strategic, and his compliments toward her work started sounding less like encouragement and more like evaluation. Still, when she spent her Sunday afternoon drafting a 40-page strategic growth proposal at her kitchen table, measuring success projections in percentages and 5-year revenue forecasts in tens of millions of dollars, she never hesitated to email it to Ryan for feedback, because trusting him felt as natural as setting her alarm for 6:30 a.m. on a Monday. And she believed that whatever happened with the promotion, their friendship would remain untouched by competition, a belief that would soon prove far more fragile than she ever expected. Ryan responded to Olivia's email less than an hour after she sent it, which was unusual for a Sunday afternoon, and his message was short but encouraging, telling her that the structure looked solid, that her market expansion model was ambitious in a smart way, and that he would review the financial assumptions more closely later that evening. Olivia felt a wave of relief reading his words, imagining him at his home office desk with a cup of black coffee, carefully scrolling through the slides. She had spent nearly 6 straight hours refining, adjusting projected revenue growth percentages, and aligning operational cost estimates with realistic benchmarks based on the last 3 fiscal years. On Monday morning, the office buzzed with a sharper edge than usual, as if everyone sensed that the next few weeks would quietly determine careers, and Olivia noticed that Ryan arrived earlier than normal. Already seated in the glass-walled conference room by 7:45 a.m., his laptop open, tie perfectly straight, eyes focused on something she could not see from the hallway. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled, but the smile did not linger the way it used to, and instead of their usual coffee, run to the cafe across the street, he mentioned he had calls back-to-back until noon. Throughout the week, small details accumulated like fine dust on a desk, subtle enough to ignore at first, but impossible to miss once you looked closely. Ryan stopped forwarding her internal emails that might strengthen her proposal. He asked more pointed questions about her timeline for implementation, and during a department strategy session, He interrupted her mid-sentence to rephrase one of her ideas in his own words, presenting it with a sharper emphasis that drew nods from senior leadership. Olivia told herself she was being overly sensitive, that competition naturally changed dynamics, and that a director-level position meant stepping into higher expectations where collaboration became more strategic. Yet she could not shake the feeling that the easy rhythm they once shared had been replaced with a careful distance measured in polite pauses and guarded expressions. On Thursday afternoon, as the deadline for proposal submissions approached, Ryan stopped by her desk and asked if she could walk him through her projected 3-year scaling model one more time, explaining that he wanted to make sure he fully understood her reasoning in case executives asked him for comparative analysis between candidates. She hesitated for only a second before agreeing, pulling up her spreadsheet and explaining how incremental 5% growth in the Midwest region could translate into nearly $8 million in additional annual revenue by year 3 if operational costs remained within forecasted limits. Ryan listened closely, nodding, occasionally asking for clarification on how she derived certain figures. And when she finished, he leaned back in his chair and told her she had done impressive work, that regardless of what happened, she had already proven she belonged at the next level. His tone was calm, reassuring, almost warm, and Olivia allowed herself to believe that their foundation was strong enough to withstand ambition. That night, as she shut down her computer and stepped into the cool Chicago air, she felt both anxious and hopeful, unaware that the information she had so freely shared would soon reappear in a setting she never expected, delivered in a voice that sounded familiar, yet carried a purpose she had not yet fully understood. The final presentation day arrived with the kind of tension that made even routine elevator rides feel longer, and Olivia stepped into the executive conference room at 9 a.m. sharp with her tablet in hand, her printed notes neatly organized, and a steady determination she had rehearsed in her mind all weekend. The room overlooked the Chicago River, sunlight reflecting off the water and casting moving patterns across the polished wood table where the senior leadership team sat reviewing printed agendas, and Ryan was already there, seated 2 chairs away from the chief operating officer, flipping through a leather portfolio with calm precision. Olivia noticed he avoided direct eye contact at first, offering only a brief nod that felt formal rather than familiar, and she told herself it was simply nerves, that anyone competing for a position tied to strategic oversight and a significant salary increase would naturally be focused. The presentations were scheduled back-to-back, 30 minutes each, with 10 minutes allocated for executive questions, and Ryan was selected to go first. He stood smoothly, adjusted his tie, and connected his laptop to the screen, and as the opening slide appeared, Olivia felt a flicker of recognition that she could not immediately place. His introduction was confident, outlining a 3-year expansion plan targeting the Midwest region, with incremental 5% growth projections aligned to operational efficiencies. And within seconds Olivia felt her heartbeat quicken because the language mirrored her own phrasing almost exactly, down to the structure of breaking down quarterly benchmarks into cumulative annual impact. As he advanced to the financial overview, the numbers appeared on screen in a format strikingly similar to the spreadsheet she had walked him through just days earlier, including the $8 million revenue estimate by year 3 under stabilized cost controls. She remained perfectly still, her expression composed, but inside her thoughts moved rapidly, replaying their Thursday conversation and the detailed explanation she had offered without hesitation. Executives leaned forward, nodding, impressed by the clarity and measurable milestones. And when the chief financial officer asked about risk mitigation strategies, Ryan responded using language that sounded like an echo of her own preparation, emphasizing scalable staffing adjustments and phased technology investments designed to maintain margins above industry average percentages. By the time he concluded, the room carried a tone of approval, and several executives complimented his strategic depth, one even remarking that the plan felt both ambitious and grounded in realistic forecasting. Ryan thanked them, gathered his notes, and returned to his seat without once looking in her direction. When it was finally Olivia's turn to present, she connected her tablet with steady hands, aware that her own slides now appeared less like original insight and more like repetition, and although she delivered her analysis clearly and answered questions with precision, She sensed a subtle shift in the executive's attention, as if the novelty had already been absorbed moments earlier. Walking out of the conference room afterward, she understood something she had not wanted to believe before, that what she had offered in trust had been repackaged into competition, and that the friendship she thought could withstand ambition had just been quietly redefined in a way she could not ignore. Olivia returned to her desk that afternoon with a calm expression that masked the storm of realization forming beneath it. And for the first time since she had joined Stratodyne Solutions, the open office layout felt less like a collaborative space and more like a stage where perception mattered more than truth. Coworkers offered polite smiles and casual remarks about how strong both presentations had been, and she responded graciously, careful to maintain professionalism while her mind replayed specific phrases Ryan had used, comparing them line by line with the notes stored on her laptop. By 3 p.m., she opened the original draft of her proposal and clicked into the document history, watching the timestamps reveal a clear record of when each section had been created, revised, and finalized, and she took screenshots quietly, not out of anger, but out of clarity, recognizing that facts would matter more than emotion in an environment driven by measurable results. Later that evening, as the office gradually emptied and the skyline outside shifted into soft gold and blue hues, Ryan approached her desk with the same composed demeanor he had worn all day and asked if she had a minute to talk. His tone was steady, almost rehearsed, and she agreed, following him into a smaller conference room with frosted glass walls that muted the noise of ringing phones and distant conversations. He began by saying that competition at this level was inevitable, that executive roles required decisive action, and that ideas evolved through collaboration, explaining that when she shared her draft, she had opened the door for refinement. Olivia listened carefully, noting how he framed the narrative as shared growth rather than appropriation. And when she calmly pointed out that specific revenue projections and structural frameworks matched her document almost exactly, he responded by suggesting that strong strategic thinkers often arrive at similar conclusions independently. There was no apology in his voice, only justification wrapped in corporate language, about initiative and leadership readiness. And when he added that perception among executives mattered just as much as technical preparation, she understood that he was not acknowledging harm because he did not believe he had crossed a line. Instead, he spoke as if he had simply acted faster, positioning himself more assertively in a competitive environment. Olivia maintained eye contact and kept her voice measured, explaining that mentorship implied trust and that trust carried responsibility, but Ryan countered by saying that advancement required adaptability and that no one in leadership would view collaboration as betrayal, only as execution. When the conversation ended, there was no raised voice, no dramatic scene. Only a quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. As she walked back to her desk and gathered her belongings, she felt a new clarity settle in, the kind that comes when illusions fall away, and she realized that what hurt most was not the competition itself, but the realization that the person she had considered an ally had chosen ambition over integrity without hesitation. The following week unfolded with an almost artificial normalcy, as if the company itself preferred to move forward without examining what had happened in that conference room overlooking the river, and Olivia adjusted to the new rhythm with quiet precision, arriving at 7:30 a.m., reviewing performance metrics, and responding to emails with the same clarity she had always maintained. Yet internally, she had shifted from trust to strategy. Instead of replaying the conversation with Ryan in frustration, she began organizing facts in a structured timeline, saving her original drafts with visible creation dates, archiving email threads where she had shared her proposal, and preserving the message he had sent acknowledging the strength of her model before submission. None of it felt dramatic, it felt procedural, like balancing a budget or reconciling a quarterly report. Meanwhile, subtle changes in office dynamics continued to surface, as colleagues referenced Ryan's presentation as the benchmark for the new strategic direction, and senior leaders occasionally asked him to elaborate on details that Olivia knew she had crafted herself. Yet she resisted the impulse to publicly challenge him because she understood that professionalism in corporate environments often spoke louder than emotional reactions. On Wednesday afternoon, The Human Resources Department announced that final decisions regarding the director role would be made after a brief internal review of submitted materials and feedback from executive leadership, and that review unexpectedly included a request for both candidates to resubmit their original strategic files directly to the review committee. When Olivia read the email, she recognized an opportunity not for confrontation, but for clarity, and she forwarded her untouched document along with its full revision history, complete with time-stamped edits stretching back several weeks. She did not add commentary or accusation, only facts presented in chronological order, allowing the documentation to speak without emotional framing. Later that day, she noticed Ryan pacing near the break room, his usual composed posture replaced with tighter movements and shorter responses during conversations, and although he did not approach her again, the air between them carried a silent awareness that the situation was no longer entirely within his control. As the review process continued over the next few days, Olivia focused on her responsibilities, leading client calls, finalizing budget forecasts measured in annual growth percentages, and supporting her team as if nothing extraordinary were unfolding, because she understood that credibility in leadership was built not only through ideas but through consistency under pressure. By Friday afternoon, an unexpected calendar invitation appeared in her inbox from the Chief Operating Officer requesting a brief private meeting the following Monday morning. And as she closed her laptop for the weekend and stepped into the crisp Chicago evening air, she felt neither vindictive nor triumphant, only steady, aware that outcomes in professional life are often determined not by who speaks the loudest, but by who can quietly demonstrate integrity when ambition tests the boundaries of trust. Monday morning arrived with a gray sky hanging low over downtown Chicago, and Olivia walked into the office at 8:15 a.m., earlier than usual, wanting a few quiet minutes at her desk before the scheduled meeting with the Chief Operating Officer. She reviewed her calendar, skimmed through client updates, and kept her breathing steady, reminding herself that she had done nothing except present her work honestly. At 9 a.m. sharp, she stepped into the executive suite, where the Chief Operating Officer and a representative from Human Resources were seated at a round table rather than across a large desk, a small detail that made the atmosphere feel less intimidating and more procedural. They thanked her for coming and explained that during the internal review of submitted strategy documents, similarities between the two proposals had prompted a closer examination of file histories and email correspondence. Olivia listened carefully, her posture composed, as the Human Resources representative noted that her document metadata showed creation dates and structured revisions spanning several weeks prior to the submission deadline, while the other file reflected significant additions within a shorter time frame. They did not accuse anyone directly, but they acknowledged that transparency and intellectual ownership were essential in leadership roles tied to multi-million-dollar annual budgets and long-term strategic planning. Olivia answered their questions with measured clarity, confirming when she had shared a draft for feedback and describing the context of that exchange without emotional language, focusing on timelines rather than feelings. The Chief Operating Officer nodded thoughtfully and thanked her for maintaining professionalism throughout the process, emphasizing that how candidates handled pressure often revealed as much about readiness as the proposals themselves. After the meeting concluded, she returned to her desk feeling neither victorious nor anxious, only aware that the situation had moved beyond private conversations and into formal evaluation. Later that afternoon, a company-wide email announced that the promotion decision would be finalized by the end of the week following completion of the review, and as colleagues speculated quietly near the break room, Olivia remained focused on preparing quarterly performance reports measured in revenue percentages and operational cost reductions, demonstrating steady leadership in visible ways. Ryan, meanwhile, appeared more reserved than usual, limiting conversations and avoiding extended eye contact during meetings. His confident posture slightly diminished. There were no confrontations, no public disputes, only a quiet shift in tone that suggested the review had introduced variables he had not anticipated. By Friday at 4:30 p.m., Olivia received another calendar invitation, this time labeled Final Decision Meeting, scheduled for the following Monday at 10 a.m. And as she shut down her computer and stepped outside into the cool evening air, watching traffic move steadily along the river, she understood that whatever the outcome, The experience had already reshaped how she viewed ambition, mentorship, and the invisible lines that separate collaboration from competition in a corporate world, where integrity is often tested when opportunity feels within reach. The following Monday at 10 a.m., Olivia walked into the executive conference room with a steady pace, the skyline beyond the glass walls bright under clear daylight, and she noticed that the atmosphere felt deliberate, almost formal, as the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, and the human resources director were already seated with folders placed neatly in front of them. Ryan sat across the table, hands folded, expression controlled, but noticeably tighter than in previous weeks. The chief executive officer began by thanking both candidates for their professionalism during a thorough review process and explained that leadership roles required not only strategic insight, but also demonstrated integrity in collaborative environments where trust shaped long-term success. As he spoke, Olivia kept her posture upright, listening without anticipation, while Ryan maintained a fixed gaze on the table. The human resources director then summarized the findings in clear, measured language, noting that document metadata, revision histories, and communication records indicated that key structural elements and financial projections originated in Olivia's earlier drafts. And while collaboration had occurred, the review committee determined that originality and authorship had been sufficiently established through time-stamped evidence. There was no accusation, no raised voices, only a calm statement that transparency and accountability were foundational expectations at the director level, especially when overseeing initiatives projected to influence revenue growth measured in tens of millions of dollars over multiple fiscal years. After a brief pause, the chief operating officer announced that Olivia Bennett would be promoted to Director of Strategy effective the first of the upcoming quarter, citing her analytical precision, composure under scrutiny, and consistent performance metrics over the past 3 years. A formal letter outlining compensation adjustments and expanded authority would follow by the end of the day. Olivia felt a controlled surge of emotion, not triumph, but validation, and she thanked the executives for their trust, emphasizing her commitment to collaborative leadership and measurable results. The meeting concluded with a brief acknowledgement that ethical standards would continue to be reinforced across the organization. And while Ryan was not publicly reprimanded in that moment, it was made clear that future leadership considerations would factor in demonstrated respect for intellectual contribution and team trust. As they exited the room, colleagues glanced up from their desks, sensing that a decision had been made, and within minutes, an internal announcement confirmed the promotion, prompting congratulatory messages to populate Olivia's inbox. Ryan returned to his office without comment, his once confident stride subdued, and though he remained employed in his senior role, the dynamic had shifted irreversibly, not through confrontation, but through documentation and quiet accountability. Standing by the window later that afternoon, looking out over the river flowing steadily beneath the city's bridges, Olivia understood that advancement had come at the cost of illusion, and while her title had changed, what mattered more was the lesson that ambition may test loyalty, but integrity, when supported by facts, speaks louder than any borrowed presentation. The weeks following Olivia's promotion unfolded with a different rhythm, one that carried both new authority and quiet reflection. As she stepped into her expanded office space overlooking the Chicago River and began outlining the first 90-day strategy plan under her leadership. Her responsibilities now included overseeing cross-functional teams, approving budget allocations measured in annual growth percentages, and presenting quarterly forecasts directly to the executive board. Yet, despite the added weight of decision-making tied to multi-million-dollar initiatives, she remained deliberate in her approach, scheduling one-on-one meetings with department leads to understand operational pain points rather than asserting control immediately. Colleagues who once saw her as the rising junior partner now addressed her with formal respect. And although congratulations continued to arrive through emails and brief hallway exchanges, Olivia noticed that success in corporate environments often created distance where familiarity once existed. Ryan maintained professionalism in meetings, contributing insights when prompted. But the ease that once defined their interactions had been replaced by measured politeness and strictly task-focused communication. There were no dramatic confrontations, only a subtle acknowledgement in the way he avoided casual conversation, as if both understood that certain lines, once crossed, could not be restored to their previous shape. Olivia did not attempt to rebuild what had fractured, nor did she seek to diminish him. Instead, she focused on setting a tone for her team that emphasized transparent collaboration, clearly defined authorship of ideas, and documented accountability in project management systems so that contributions would never again blur into ambiguity. During her first executive presentation as director, she introduced a refined strategic roadmap projecting sustainable 5% annual growth across targeted regions while stabilizing operational costs within defined margins, and she made a deliberate point of highlighting team members by name when referencing successful initiatives, reinforcing a culture where recognition was tied directly to documented work. Over time, performance metrics improved steadily, client retention rates climbed, and internal morale strengthened under consistent communication, demonstrating that leadership built on clarity and fairness produced measurable results beyond any single presentation slide. On a crisp autumn afternoon nearly 3 months after the decision meeting, Olivia found herself standing by the office window watching boats move along the river, reflecting not on the promotion itself, but on the transformation that had preceded it. She understood that ambition was neither inherently good nor inherently destructive, but that character revealed itself most clearly when opportunity tested personal boundaries. The friendship she once valued had dissolved into professional distance, yet she no longer viewed that loss with resentment, only with perspective, recognizing that trust should be given thoughtfully and that integrity, once defended with composure and evidence, becomes a quiet strength that no one can easily undermine. Nearly 6 months after stepping into her new role, Olivia Bennett no longer measured time by the tension of that promotion cycle, but by the steady cadence of quarterly results, board presentations, and the quiet confidence that came from leading with clarity. Revenue growth across the Midwest region had reached 4.8% by mid-year, just shy of the projected 5% target, and operational costs remained within controlled margins, reinforcing that the strategy she had built was not only original but sustainable. Her calendar was fuller now, often booked from 8 a.m. to late afternoon with cross-functional reviews, yet she made space every Friday to meet with junior analysts who reminded her of herself 3 years earlier, ambitious and eager for guidance. During those conversations, she emphasized documentation, transparency, and the importance of setting boundaries in collaborative environments. Lessons learned not from textbooks, but from lived experience inside a 12-story building of glass and ambition. Ryan remained at Stratodyne Solutions, continuing in his senior role with professional competence. And while their paths crossed in meetings and brief hallway exchanges, the emotional undertone had faded into neutral respect. There was no lingering hostility, only a shared understanding that certain chapters close without dramatic confrontation, replaced instead by quiet distance shaped by consequence. On one particular afternoon, as autumn shifted toward winter and the city lights reflected against early evening darkness, Olivia paused by the window overlooking the Chicago River and allowed herself to think about the version of her who once believed that loyalty alone could shield a friendship from competition. She recognized now that ambition does not create character flaws, it reveals them, and that trust without discernment can become vulnerability in environments where opportunity carries financial and reputational weight measured in millions of dollars and years of career progression. The promotion had elevated her title, expanded her salary, and granted her influence over strategic direction. But what remained most valuable was not the corner office or the executive seat at the table. It was the quiet certainty that she had navigated pressure without sacrificing integrity. She had not retaliated, she had not raised her voice, and she had not allowed emotion to override evidence, choosing instead to let documented truth speak on her behalf. As she gathered her coat and prepared to leave for the evening, stepping into the crisp air of downtown Chicago where traffic lights flickered against the cold, she understood that the experience had not been about losing a work friendship, but about gaining clarity, and that in a corporate world where titles change and alliances shift, the one asset no one can take without permission is the integrity you choose to protect.